Hi, I'm Carl Franklin. I've been waiting a long time for this one. You might think Microsoft would have made playing audio in MAUI a priority, but it's tricky due to platform-specific code. As you saw in the .NET Rocks Xamarin Forms app series on this show, it was a piece of cake with Xamarin Forms. But only recently has there emerged a plugin that allows us to seamlessly play audio across all platforms in MAUI. I have to give Gerald Versluis props for showing off this new plugin. I took what he showed to the next level. So in this episode, we'll be downloading an MP3 file, storing it in a local cache so we can play it when we're offline, and giving the user audio controls: play, pause, stop, go back, and go forward. Of course, I made my repo available to everyone, and you can get to it from the .netshow.com episode 27. Audio in MAUI is coming right up on the .NET Show. All right, I'm going to start by creating a .NET MAUI Blazor app in Visual Studio 2022. Yes, that's right. I said Blazor because if you remember in episode 12, we compared MAUI XAML versus MAUI Blazor. And I said, and I still stand by it, that I prefer using Blazor over XAML. So that's what I'm going to use. And I'm going to call it Audio Test Blazor MAUI. Now, I'm going to use the default Windows platform, but watch what happens when I run this. All right, well, you can't see this, but the actual width of this window is more than twice what you're seeing here, which is 1080p. Let me just move it over and you'll see what I mean. And the reason is, I think, I have a 49-inch monitor, and so in order for this to fit, every single time I run this, I have to resize it so that it all fits within the window. But in a previous episode, I showed you a little trick for resizing a Windows MAUI app, and I'm going to go ahead and do that now. So I'm going to start with a global static class called Globals. It's going to have some references and some measurements that we're going to use in multiple places. So I'm going to add Globals.CS. One thing I'm still not getting used to is every time I add a class in a MAUI app, the CS project comes up. So I'm using this compiler condition here. If Windows, then I have a couple using statements. And down here in my static class, I've got the desired width and height for my window. And I've also got this Microsoft.UI.windowing.appWindow reference, but only if we're on Windows. Next, I'm going to go to my app.xaml.cs file. I'm going to replace that with something else. All right, so here we have those same using statements if we're using Windows. And then down here in the constructor, I'm doing a window handler. And that passes in the name of the window and the handler and the view. So this is a way that we can look at the MAUI window and the native window. The MAUI window comes from the handler virtual view. The native window comes from the handler platform view. Now we activate the platform view with native window.activate, and we get a window handle. That's an int pointer. And if you haven't done much Win32 programming or interop with Win32, this might be new to you. But this is the code that you need to get a MAUI app window. I get the window ID, then I create an app window from Microsoft.UI.windowing.appWindow.getFromWindowID, and I'm putting that into my globals. Remember? App window. And now I'm calling resize based on the window width and the window height. And that will resize the window. But the problem is it's still going to be over here somewhere. And when I mean over here, I mean way over here where you can't see. So we want to set the position as well. But the position has to be set here in main page XAML CS. Now we've got the using statements if we're on Windows. And in the constructor, we have to handle the loaded event. Going back to app XAML, you would think that I could hide the window because it does have hide, but it doesn't work for some reason. But I'm going to go ahead and uncomment that. Back here, I'll go ahead and uncomment this one to show it. And you'll see that it doesn't work. I don't know why. So we get the width and height from the display, device display current, main display info, width and height. We're calculating the X and Y based on half. So half the width, half the height. Then I create a point in 32 with X and Y, and I move the app window to that point. That does work. But this whole show thing, it's already showing. Now I know you can't see offline, but I'm going to just narrate what happens when I run this. It shows up on the left, boom, and then it comes in the middle. So there's a brief flash while it's in the wrong position. In other words, the resize worked, but this did not. So I'm going to go back to commenting it out. And if any of you alert viewers know of a way that I could do this where it would actually work, please let me know. All right, so we solved that problem. Now we can move on. And I'm going to move on the way I usually do by removing stuff I'm not going to use. So that means fetch data and counter, go away. That means my data folder, which has the weather forecast in it, goes away. That means in Maui program, we don't need data. We don't need the weather forecast service. And also in shared, I don't want the nav menu. And the main layout, I want to change so it doesn't have any of this stuff. Doesn't have the nav menu. Just a page. I'm going to remove the survey prompt and the index page. Let's take out the survey prompt. Removing the cruft. Okay, let's see what happens now. Now we're ready to start our app. Now I'm going to go to the CS project file, click on the project name. All the way down here, I'm going to add this, Plugin.Maui.Audio. Now I learned about this from this video by Gerald Verslewis, Play Sound in .NET MAUI with Plugin.Maui.Audio. Note the date, September 5th. So before September 5th, I was pretty convinced that there wasn't a good way to play audio. But Gerald says in this video that he and the team took all the best parts of the existing code that worked with Xamarin and made it work with Maui. And so he shows off how to play an embedded resource, like a sound effect, where you take a WAV file and you add it to your local resources, and then you can play it that way. But I wasn't interested in that particular scenario. I'm interested in downloading an MP3 file and then playing it. But I don't want to download it every time. I want to download it, I want to store it in a cache, in a local cache, and then check the cache before I download it again. Load it locally if it's in the cache. All right, that's what I want to do because I want an offline MP3 player. Because I have several apps that I need to do, including the .NET Rocks app in Maui, music to flow by or music to code by, and I also want to do an application for PWOP Studios that has all of the music that I've produced for other artists and all the albums that I've created and give my musical fans a way to support the studio. So Plugin.Maui.Audio. This is a great, simple tool to play audio cross-platform without any requirements except for this, and it just works. So we're going to go back to Maui Program, and I'm going to add this global using statement. So now all I need to do is add this, builder.services.addSingleton audiomanager.current. Now we can inject that into any page where I want to access the audio manager, which lets me create a player that lets me do sound. One thing that's great about this is that every player that you create from the audio manager is unique. In other words, you can create multiple audio players from the same audio manager, and each one plays concurrently. So if you want to have one file that's playing in the background, you can play that with one player, lower the volume, and create another player for another MP3 or WAV file or whatever, another audio file. And you can pan that one, you can play it on demand. Like, this is a really great simple tool. I should also mention that it's in preview. Did you notice this? As of this recording, this is a preview version. So if you go to search for it in the NuGet Package Manager, make sure that previews are enabled. All right, from here we're going to add the using statement to _imports. Now I want to create a class that represents the state of media being played. Playing, paused, and stopped. I need an enum. So I'm going to add a class over here called MediaState. Now you would think that the player has this sort of thing built in, but it doesn't. It has an isPlaying property. But I also want to know if it's stopped or it's paused, because we're going to do different things with the UI depending. So that's why I created this enum. Next, I really don't like the way the code editor in a Razor file works in the latest Visual Studio template version for MAUI Blazor apps. So I'm going to create a code behind file for Index. All right, we'll come back to this in a minute. But first, let's go to Index.razor. And you can see I have several images here that refer to buttons. Rewind, play, pause, stop, fast forward. We need to add those buttons. So let's do that now. It'll be in the web root. If you remember the mobile DNR series that we did in Xamarin Forms, I'm going to use those same buttons. Now also, I have this class here, rewind button class, play button class. And the reason I did this is because I want to simulate these images being disabled. So that means their opacity is going to be either 0.5 or 1. And I have to control that as well with code. But also, I have this CSS class that when you click on the image, it will get slightly smaller to sort of indicate that you clicked on it. But I only want that if it's available. You'll see. So I'm going to add that CSS file now. It'll be a scoped CSS file, so it'll be Index.razor.css. So let's add that. So it's either going to be image button or nothing. So if it's image button and we click it, we're going to go down to 95% of the size. Now at this point, I'm going to run it before I even describe what the code does, so that you can see what we're doing. So it's asking me to enter a URL to an MP3 file. And by default, I'm giving it an MP3 file, so you don't have to go hunting for one. This is an original tune of mine called Chain Reaction. Now let's watch what happens when I click. Note that the play button will get a little smaller when I click. Downloading. Playing. Now I can pause, but a couple of things went on here. First of all, notice that when I click these buttons now, nothing happens. They don't shrink, as if I click them, but the play button will resume.
It was a bad day, standing on the freeway, wondering where in the world am I.
Okay, now I'm going to demonstrate the fast forward and rewind buttons. As I'm playing, this one will jump ahead 10 seconds. This one will jump back 10 seconds. But watch what happens when I get less than 10 seconds from the beginning and I click this. It'll just go all the way to the beginning. So here we go.
It was a cloud caught in a blonde weeping at me. But so I had a shady day.
There you go. Now if I click stop, everything goes away, and when I play, it plays from the beginning. But if I hit pause and play, it continues where it left off. All right, so that is the functionality that I want. Let's go back to Index.razor. So at the top, my div that says enter a URL, then my input, which is bound to the URL field. Now I've got, again, my classes bound to specific strings, which are either going to be image button or nothing. Now I have my width hard set to 50 pixels, and my opacity is going to be one of two. Controls opacity, which means that it's disabled, or play opacity. So this is 0.5 and this is 1. But those are their default values. Now I have click handlers for rewind, play, pause, stop, and forward, and of course my buttons. Now I've got below that a progress indicator, and it just occurs to me that I don't need this because I'm not setting it in JavaScript. I don't need an ID. So this is going to be 100% of the width, 50 pixels high. The max, which is the maximum value, is 100, and the value is set to a percentage, which is going to be a double between 0 and 100. And then I have two messages down here, the audio message, which is either going to be playing or paused, or it also could be an error message. And then the play position, which I'm going to create from the current position, minutes and seconds, / total duration, minutes and seconds. All right, enough there. Let's move on to the code. This is what you wanted to see. So here we're injecting this iAudio manager from Plugin.Maui.Audio, audio manager. I've got a player, a single player. I want only one instance of it because I don't want multiple things playing at the same time. I've got a stream, which I'm going to need to access in more than one place. This is the stream used for playing, file stream. Got my MediaState, got my default URL. Of course, you can put in any URL. That's the whole point. I've got an audio message, which is playing, paused, or an error. Got my percentage, which is a double, percentage of audio played, and that is used to set the progress bar value. Then I have a string, progress %. That's the formatted percentage string. We're not going to show that, but that would show you like 1%, 2%, 10%, if you want to use that. Then I have the play position, which is the string. And again, that's calculated from the current position. And that might be 0 minutes, 34 seconds. And the total duration, which might be 4 minutes and 21, something like that. So that would show you, hey, this is right now at 34 seconds out of 4 minutes and 21 seconds. Now, controls opacity is default to 0.5. That will give us a disabled effect. The play opacity is 1. The play button class is image button, right? The image reacts when it's pressed. And all of the other button classes I'm setting to an empty string. Finally, I have a timer that I'm going to fire every 50 milliseconds and update the position. Now this is where all of the UI is done in this private method called setState. So anytime that I'm playing, I call setState with MediaState.playing. First of all, I set my MediaState, which is my private variable, right? And if we're playing, the controls opacity is 1, meaning that everything besides play is enabled, but play opacity is 0.5, meaning the play button is disabled. My audio message playing, my play button class is nothing. I don't want the play button to shrink when I click on it if it's disabled. All the other ones get image button. Okay? Now, if the state is MediaState paused or stopped, I'm going to do the same thing with controls opacity and play opacity, but opposite. So the controls opacity are disabled. The play opacity is 1. Play button class is image button. So these are the default values, right? Everything else is disabled. But now I need a little logic. If the state is stopped, I want to set the percentage to 0, the audio message to an empty string, and play position to an empty string. So that essentially clears out these things. Otherwise, I just want to set the audio message to paused. All right, let's move on to play audio. So this gets called from the play button, right? If we're already playing, I want to return. If I'm paused, then I'm going to say player.play. I'm going to set state, which changes the UI to media playing, and bail. Now at this point, we should have a URL and we should be able to play. If the URL doesn't exist, let's say the user clears out the URL and presses the play button, then we're going to bail. Please enter a URL to an MP3 file. So now we need to look for the local file to see if it's in the cache directory. So the cache directory I'm getting from filesystem.current.cache directory. Let's look at the documentation to see what this folder is and if we can depend on it. This is the documentation for MAUI, and you want to look for file system helpers. The way you can easily find it is look for something like C# MAUI file system current.cache directory. So this tells you about the cache directory. And it says cache data can be used for any data that needs to persist longer than temporary data, but shouldn't be data that is required to operate the app, as the operating system may clear this storage. That is what we want to use. The rest of these don't make sense. The cache directory is where we're going to put our files. So I got the cache directory. I create the local file name from the cache directory and just the file name portion of the URL, which in this case would be this right here, just the MP3 file name. And now I'm going to check to see if it's in the local cache directory, if that file exists. And if it doesn't, then I'm going to set the audio message to downloading. You saw that, right? And update the UI. And this is all the code that downloads the file from the URL. Now I'm using an HTTP client because I want to do this asynchronously. I create a new URI from the URL and call client getAsync asynchronously. Now if it fails, we have all this wrapped in a try catch. And at the bottom, we're setting audio message to please enter a valid URL. Good enough. Now, of course, it could fail because we're not online, but whatever. Getting back to this, we're going to ensure a success status code. And now we're using a stream, await response.content.read as stream async. We're getting a file info from the local file, which it doesn't exist, right? But that is the path. And now we're using the file stream. We're going to use fileinfo.openWrite and await stream copy to async file stream. So this little piece of code right here downloads the MP3 file to our local file. So by the time we get to this next line of code, 126, the file exists. So we're going to open it and get our stream. Remember, the stream is a module level variable, right? So there's only one stream at a time. So we're going to open read, and we're going to create a player with Audio Manager, create player from the stream. Now I need to handle the playback ended event because I need to dispose of the resources and do some UI stuff when everything ends. I'm going to create a new timer. Again, this is a module level variable. I only want one timer. And here's the number of milliseconds between each elapsed. I'm doing an inline handler here for elapsed, and note that it's async. I'm not even using the state and the args here. I'm just getting the information from the player itself, the current position. So this percentage is based on the current position and the duration. So I'm not using the progress percent, but it's a string if you want to show it, the percent completed. Now I'm going to calculate this play position string, right, from the current and the complete duration. So I get time spans from the current position and the duration. And my duration string is now the time span for the total duration, .minutes.toString, 2 digits, colon, and then 2 digits for the seconds. I'm going to do the same thing for the current position, TS current, minutes, and seconds. Now I have that play position, and now I'm going to update the UI. So that happens every 50 milliseconds while the timer is enabled, right? So now I'm going to start the timer. I'm going to start playing. I'm going to set the state for playing and update the UI. All right, next I'm going down to the bottom to the playback ended handler. Now I'm going to update the UI that we've stopped. I'm going to dispose the stream, right? I'm going to stop the timer and dispose the timer. I'm going to unhook this event handler, and I'm going to dispose the player. and then I'm going to invoke state as changed. All right, now the only thing left are these other methods. Fast forward goes ahead 10 seconds, right? So if 10 seconds from now is less than the duration, we're going to seek with the player to that position. Otherwise, if we're less than 10 seconds from the end, we're just going to stop. Stop audio, which is the next one. Stop audio, I'm checking to make sure that MediaState is playing. I'm going to call player.stop and set the state to stopped. Pause, exactly the same thing. I'm going to make sure we're playing. If we are playing, I'm going to pause and then set the state, which changes the UI if you remember. Rewind is the last one. Make sure we're playing. The position minus 10 seconds. And if it's less than 0, we're just going to set it to 0. In other words, this position right here will be 10 seconds before the current position. And if that means that it's minus, less than 0, I'm going to set it to 0 so we go back to the beginning and just with player seek. And folks, that is it. Now, if I run this again, you'll notice that the downloading doesn't happen. It's just going to play. There you go. Now, I have tried this with turning off the network, turning off the internet, and indeed it does work. But let's just try it on my Samsung Android phone next. So for that, I'm going to go up to my platform here and select Android local devices in my Samsung, and I'll run it. And here it is. I'm holding my phone up to the microphone, and you can hear it. So let's fast forward. Rewind. Pause. Play. Stop. Yeah, that works great. Oh, and just in case you're wondering, here's the Mac Catalyst version.
Standing on the freeway, wondering where in the world it was a close shave.
And here's the iOS version. So there you go, audio in a MAUI app, running on Windows, Android, iOS, and Mac Catalyst. Hey, thanks for watching. I hope you found this helpful. I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Please visit blazortrain.com and the .NETshow.com for more great content.